Welcome to Tungsten Automation. My name is John Bradford, and in this short video I'm going to show you the process for creating a new document type and batch class for an invoice. Now, the charge is to take an invoice and extract 4 bits of information off of it. We are looking for the invoice date, the invoice number, the subtotal, and the total. We're going to use this invoice as our basis. Now, this is a sample we're going to be using. It is actually 2 pages. And in this case, it is 2 separate invoices. As you can see, they have all the information. Here's your invoice number, invoice date. Down at the bottom is your subtotal and your total. So, the process is logging into the beautiful web environment. We're going to make a copy of this base batch class. We're going to call it AP Processing Demo. And we got to create a temporary folder for the information. And we'll call it 1. And there's our new batch class. There's a test document in here that I always have in there. I'm going to delete that because I'm not going to need it. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create that new invoice doc type. And now you see there's our invoice doc type. Notice there are no index fields identified yet. I'm going to add the 4 that we need. That's invoice number, invoice date, subtotal, and total. Now, in this way of doing things, we have to identify the location and the key value pairs for each individual field manually. So I'm going to add. Now we're going to try to find that invoice date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just one of the pages from that invoice. That's all I need. That's the wrong invoice. All right, now I have to train the key value pairs. So I'm just going to take the second page of that invoice. Actually, I need to add. Now we're going to look for the invoice date. So I'll take the second page of that invoice. Now I'm going to go try to find the invoice date. Well, we know it's up here. So I'm going to create my key. By simply drawing a box and clicking. And it found invoice date. And then I'm going to say, what does the value look like? And in this case, it looks like a date. And I'll test. And it did find it correctly. Note that no matter what type of invoice we drop, if it finds invoice date and then a date after it anywhere on the document, it will locate it and populate that field. All right, let's do the same thing for invoice number. So I'm going to add. Invoice number is simply identified by invoice. And then your number. Now, since invoice number is not identified very well, I'm going to try and whittle it down just a little bit by saying not only identify it in a very specific format, but also look at the top of the page. It's normally where the invoice number appears. I'll test. It did find it with 100% confidence. All right, let's do the subtotal. Same process. And we know the subtotal's down at the bottom somewhere, so there it is. So I'll go down and say, okay, if you see subtotal, look for a number after it and populate that into the subtotal field. And when I say number, I mean dollar amount. Test. Now in this case, it found an extra 0. So what I want to do is I'm actually going to say, grab the first instance that you find. In this case, we get rid of that excess 0. We'll apply that. And now we'll go do total. Same process. We're going to add. Go down to the bottom. There's total. So I'm just going to look for total. And after that, I'm going to try to find a dollar amount, just like it did for subtotal. Found the dollar amount. And I'll test. Now, we ran into a little issue. We got two things. One, I want to make sure that I'm only looking to grab the first. But the other thing you'll notice is I have subtotal and total both contain the word total. So it found them both. So what I need to do is I need to somehow say, okay, find total that doesn't start with sub. So I'm going to have to make a slight alteration to my key regular expression. So we're basically going to say, find total that is not preceded by sub. We'll validate that. We'll test. And this time we only found the one total. We'll apply. All right. So we're now finding all four fields. Last thing I want to do is I want that database connection. So I'm going to go out and say, okay, I want to send this information to my database. And I'll start adding my fields. So invoice number. We're going to the invoice export. And this is invoice number. Add invoice date. Invoice export. Invoice date. Add subtotal. Same connection. Subtotal. And finally, we'll add the total. Have them all. We'll apply that. And the last thing I need to do is make sure that I have my database export connector installed and turned on. So there's my DB export. I'm going to grab it, pop it in here. It's in there. We will apply it and turn it on and deploy. The last thing I need to do is I need to tell it what that invoice looks like. So once again, I'm going to go back to my document types. I'm going to grab that single page, drop it in for my learning for classification. And if I check my Learn files, there it is. First page, and it has been classified. All right. So now let's test the process. So I'm going to grab a document, and this time I'm actually going to grab that 2-page document. We'll drop it in here. Now, one adjustment that I am going to have to, I'll go ahead and start it here. We'll start the batch. Oh, I need to specify the batch. Pause for just a second. All right, so let's start that batch. Okay, let's upload a document and test. So I'm going to take that 2-page invoice and we'll start the batch. Now we'll go over to my batch instance manager, which is where we can monitor the progress of all of our batches. And we'll see here in a minute, that one should start coming through. And there it is. Going through all the different stages, page processing, document assembly, extraction, validate, automated validation, and now it should stop and validate. All right, one adjustment I did have to make, which I didn't show you. First time I tested this document went straight through without ever stopping in validation, so there was nothing to see. It captured everything at the highest confidence as possible and allowed it to go through. I made it stop. So, as you see, we did capture the invoice number, the subtotal, and the total on that first document. I go down to the second one, the same thing, and it did separate out the total and the subtotal. So I'll validate the documents. They'll go off. We'll go back to my batch instance manager. And it's gone, which means if I go look at my database and I refresh, there are my 2 entries in the database. Very nice. All right, so that was the long way to create the document type. Let me show you the automated way. So if I go back here, I have invoice here. I created that one manually. I had to go up, add document type, name it, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to delete that one. Apply and deploy. So I now have no document types. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that single page invoice again, and I'm actually going to drop it in a create document type from sample. So I'm going to grab it, drop it here, and I'm going to call it invoice auto. And I can actually have it do both key value pairs and table extraction. I'll say OK. And there it is. So let's open it up and see what's in there. So not only did I get my invoice and invoice date, I also got a whole bunch of other stuff, including my subtotal, and if I go to my last page, there's total. So I got all of the mandatory fields, plus it found a whole lot of other stuff. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go make my database connection, just like I did before. Demo data. We'll add invoice, which is actually my invoice number. Add invoice date. We'll add my subtotal. And total. We'll apply. All right. Last thing I need to do is tell it what that invoice looks like. This is why I had to delete the other one, because it's the exact same type of invoice. So I'll drag it here to train it. And if you look, there it is, ready to go. So now when I drop the invoice in there, it will know what it looks like and how to extract the information. So once again, I'll go back. I'll grab that 2 invoice pack. We'll start it. And now we'll go to my batch instance manager and we'll watch and wait. Here it comes. There it is. Give it a second to get to the validate state. And there it is. We'll open it up. And now you see not only do we have the invoice number and invoice date, we also have a whole bunch of other stuff. There's our subtotals. Now, if you will notice, we have the same problem here. Subtotal is the same on both. So I would need to go back in and make that same adjustment. So I will do that. So I'll go back in and I will adjust my invoice. So I'll go into invoice, total, key value extraction. All right, we're going to edit it. There's my key. And as you see, if I test it here, I'm going to get both of them again. Okay, so I need to go here. I'm going to put in my not sub. And let's test it. Let's make sure that it works. So if I put in total, it finds it. But if I put in subtotal, it does not find it. So we'll select the regex. Let's test again. And this time I only find the one. So just like we did before. So I'll go back here. We'll run that one through extraction. Let's test it again. And this time I have both values. I'm going to validate everything. Go back to my batch. It's gone. I go back. I will refresh, and I should now have two more. There you go. Thank you very much.